Welcome back, everybody. We're doing a deep dive today on something we know everyone's talking about, traditional family values,
Oh, yeah, it's always in the news, isn't it?
all the time.
Hmm.
And, we were sent so many different things about this, like blog post, even an academic article, and a Reddit thread.
Wow.
Yeah, really, really interesting stuff. And we're going to try to, figure out what this phrase even means today.
It's a good question because, when you hear it, it seems so simple.
Right.
But then when you actually, start thinking about it, it's like, wait a minute, what are we actually talking about here?
Exactly. And so to get us started, we're going to look at this blog post by Elena Kate Pettit, who calls herself a traditional housewife.
Okay.
And she's very clear about her views. So I'm curious to see what you think about them.
Well, just right off the bat, she's all about this really specific family model.
Okay.
Husband makes the money, the wife takes care of the house.
Yeah.
And the way they split up the work is all about, she says, talent and strength, not trying to be perfectly equal.
I noticed that, and she even sells a kitchen management manual on her blog.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it's like a whole system for running your house this way. But what I thought was really interesting is that she ties all of this back to religion.
Mm-hmm.
Like she says her choices are part of God's plan, and she even talks about biblical marriage dynamics. Like it's not just what she prefers, it's like the right way to live.
Yeah. And that makes you wonder then, is this idea of traditional family values, can you even separate it from religion or culture?
Right.
Because for her, it seems like those things are totally connected.
Absolutely. And I wonder, for people who don't share those same beliefs, does her argument even make sense to them?
Yeah.
Or is there something about this model that just appeals to people no matter what they believe?
Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe something we'll keep seeing as we go through these sources.
Yeah, for sure. So let's switch gears a bit now and look at this article from Population Matters. They have a totally different take on this whole thing.
All right.
Yeah, they're looking at the big picture, how families impact stuff, like how many people are born and the economy.
Okay.
And they're not so sure that pushing traditional family values is the answer to the UK having fewer babies.
Interesting.
Yeah, and they're really worried about what they call pronatalist policies, which are like government programs to encourage people to have more kids.
Uh-huh.
They think these policies end up limiting women's choices and their reproductive rights.
So, what would those policies even look like in real life?
Yeah, I was wondering that too.
What's an example?
Yeah, could you give us an example?
Sure. So, a lot of countries, they give money or tax breaks to families with lots of kids,
Okay.
or they make childcare cheaper or give you more time off work if you have a bigger family.
Mhm.
Basically, they try to make it easier and, more appealing to have more children.
Oh, I see. But what Population Matters is saying is yeah, that might sound nice, but it can have bad side effects, especially for women.
Right.
It's almost like forcing people into one kind of family.
Exactly. And they also disagree with this idea that having an older population is bad for the economy. They even talk about this report called Silver Linings, which says that older people are like an unused economic resource.
Yeah, interesting. So we've got two very different views already on how families impact society and money.
Yeah.
One side says more babies means more money. The other's like, no, there's more to it than that.
Yeah.
And this brings us to the Reddit thread, which I found fascinating because it's real people talking about this stuff in their own lives.
Yeah, not just experts or politicians, but people actually dealing with this.
Exactly. And even though this thread was in a more conservative space online,
Mm-hmm.
there were so many different opinions on what traditional family values actually means.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah, you had some people totally agreeing with that blogger, Pettit, the man works, the woman stays home.
Right.
But others were like, hey, my family's not like that at all.
Yeah.
There's even a dad who's the main caregiver while the mom has a job outside the home. Yeah. So even in this group with similar beliefs, they see that the traditional model doesn't work for everyone or isn't even what everyone wants.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to remember that everyone's different.
Totally. And it makes you think, are we holding on to this idea of the traditional family because it's something we've lost or something we're scared of losing? Is it just nostalgia or something deeper?
That's a really interesting question, and it actually reminds me of this article by Kevin Noble Maillard. He really challenges this whole romanticized view of traditional family values. He says it's mostly a myth.
What do you mean?
Well, he says we tend to only remember the good stuff about the past.
Oh, so we forget about all the problems even in those traditional families.
Exactly. And that's what's so interesting about Pettit. She like frames being a traditional housewife as empowering.
Oh, yeah. She loves that whole queen of her castle thing.
Totally. She's like owning those traditional roles.
Right.
Like it's a source of strength for her, even liberation in a way, which I think challenges how people usually see women who make that choice.
Yeah, it's like she's turning the whole stay-at-home mom stereotype on its head.
Right. Instead of seeing it as like being oppressed or stuck in the past, it's a conscious choice for her, a good one.
And it makes you wonder, like, is she reacting to some of the pressures of being a woman today? You know,
Mm.
like she's found a different kind of freedom by stepping out of the rat race and
Right.
defining success her own way.
That's a good point, and it just shows how diverse experiences can be, even within this idea of traditional family values.
Uh-huh.
What's empowering for one person could feel limiting to someone else. It's not a one-size-fits-all thing.
Definitely. And she's honest about the fact that people don't always get it.
Oh, yeah.
She talks about being criticized, even like shut out for her views by the media and other women who think she's betraying feminism.
That's really interesting because it brings up this tension within feminism itself.
Right.
On the one hand, you have this fight for equality and choice for women, but then there's this other layer where some choices are seen as better or more liberated.
Yeah. And Pettit's basically saying, who are you to tell me what's liberating for me?
Right.
It's like she wants a bigger definition of feminism, one that includes more options, even ones that go against the norm.
I see what you mean. And she doesn't stop there. She also argues that men get a bad rap in all these conversations about gender roles.
Oh, yeah. She's really passionate about defending masculinity.
Yeah, like she rejects the idea that it's automatically toxic or bad.
I thought that was so interesting because you don't hear that very often.
No, you don't.
It's like she's trying to take back the good parts of traditional masculinity, like strength, protecting others, leadership,
Uh-huh.
and show how those qualities can be good for families.
And she connects that to her belief in dividing labor based on like natural abilities, not forced equality.
Right. So men and women might be naturally better at different things.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that she thinks they're unequal, but they might have different strengths that lead them to different roles.
So it's more about working together than competing, like a partnership where both people contribute, but in ways that fit who they are and what makes them happy.
Exactly. And she even admits that this traditional approach isn't always easy.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she talks about how there can be misunderstandings, resentment, even power imbalances if those roles get too rigid or if people aren't communicating.
So it's not a perfect system.
No, it's like any relationship, it takes work.
Right. And she emphasizes being respectful, talking openly, and being willing to adapt.
Well, which brings us back to balance, you know? It's like
Right.
she's looking for that sweet spot between tradition and the realities of modern life,
Yeah.
not blindly following the past, but thoughtfully bringing those values into today's world.
And isn't that what we all try to do?
Mm.
Figure out how to live in this crazy modern world, but keep the things that matter to us,
Yeah.
whether it's tradition or personal values or a mix of both.
That's a good point, and I think it's something a lot of people can relate to, even if they don't agree with everything Pettit says.
It's this search for meaning and connection that goes beyond our differences.
Uh-huh.
And it makes you wonder how much of this debate about traditional family values is really about something else entirely, you know?
Like what?
Like wanting stability in a world that feels so chaotic,
Okay.
or wanting to simplify things, or even being scared of change itself.
Those are really interesting ideas, and it makes me think back to that Population Matters article and their worries about those pronatalist policies.
Oh, yeah.
Are those policies just about having more babies, or are they about this fear of society changing, this desire to hold on to the past?
It's like we're looking for answers in numbers and structures when the real questions are about deeper human needs and anxieties.
Exactly. And even that BetterHelp article, while they focus on family unity, they're also very much of this time.
How so?
They talk about online therapy as a resource for families.
Oh, right. Which is definitely a modern solution.
Yeah, so even as we're dealing with these big questions about family and tradition, the tools we have are changing too.
It's like we're constantly trying to find new ways to connect and support each other in a world that keeps changing.
And that takes us back to that Reddit thread and all those different voices.
Yeah, some people clinging to the traditional model,
Yeah.
others embracing newer ways.
It's like a mini version of the bigger debate happening all around us.
Right.
People from all walks of life trying to find what works for them and their families.
And it's messy and complicated.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no easy answers.
And that's what makes it real.
Okay, so we have all these different perspectives. Pettit's personal take on traditional homemaking, population matters.
Yeah.
And their worries about the impact on society
Right.
and everyday people on Reddit sharing their experices.
Mm-hmm.
But we haven't talked about Kevin Noble Maillard's article yet, which is
Mm.
pretty critical of romanticizing traditional family values.
Yeah, that's true. And I think it's the perfect way to move into the next part of our conversation,
Right.
because he makes us really think about what that phrase even means and all the hidden assumptions and biases that might be there.
I'm ready. Let's hear what he has to say and see how it connects to everything else. Okay, so this article by Kevin Noble Maillard, he really shakes things up when it comes to traditional family values. His main point is this idea of a perfect, happy family from the past. It's pretty much a myth.
Oh, yeah, he's not pulling any punches.
Nope. And he says we kind of cherry pick our memories of the past.
Like we focus on the good and ignore the bad.
Exactly, like we're longing for this simpler time that never really existed.
Right.
And Mayold says that by clinging to this perfect image, we're actually avoiding the real issues families face today.
Yeah, he uses this great term retro ideal to describe that, we romanticize the past but forget about all the problems families have always had.
And he thinks this nostalgia can actually be harmful.
Uh-huh. Because it makes us resist change and progress.
Is there an example from the article that really stuck with you?
Yeah, he talks about how pop culture loves to show this perfect 1950s nuclear family.
Oh, yeah, like Leave It to Beaver.
Exactly, but then he points out that during that same time, there was a ton of racial segregation. Women were treated unfairly, and lots of families didn't have access to basic resources.
So it's like those old TV shows where everything looks perfect on the surface.
Right, but underneath, there's a whole lot going on that they don't want to show.
And Maillard saying we need to look past those surface images and really understand how complicated family history is.
Only then can we have a real conversation about what family values should look like now in the 21st century.
So he's pushing for a more honest view of the past and a more open-minded approach to the future of families.
Exactly, and it makes me think about all the sources we've looked at.
Yeah.
Elena Kate Pettit with her traditional model based on religion, copulation matters, worried about how those traditional structures affect society as a whole.
Mhm.
And then those real people on Reddit showing just how different families really are.
It's like we've come full circle. We started with what seemed like a simple question. What are traditional family values?
Yeah. And now it's clear there's no simple answer.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson here. There's no one right way to be a family, no blueprint.
Right. It's about understanding that everyone's different families are always changing and focusing on those core values that hold relationships together no matter what form they take.
And those core values seem to connect all these different viewpoints, even when they disagree on the details.
Yeah, for sure.
Pettit finds fulfillment in her traditional role. Population matters,
Yeah.
wants policies that support more kinds of families.
But it all comes down to creating spaces where people feel loved, supported, and connected.
That's a great way to put it, and it reminds me of the BetterHelp article. They were all about the benefits of strong families, no matter what they look like.
Yeah, they talked about belonging, support, and how important those things are for our well-being.
It's like they're saying no matter how messed up the world gets, family can be this safe haven.
A source of strength and stability.
And that's true whether it's a nuclear family, a blended family, a single parent, a group of close friends, whatever.
Those core values of love and support, that's what makes a family strong.
And maybe that's the real legacy of those traditional family values, not holding on to a specific model from the past.
But taking those timeless ideas of love, commitment, support, and figuring out how to live them out in our own families.
So wrapping up this deep dive, I think the key takeaway is this traditional family values might not be about rules, but about guiding principles.
Principles that help us build strong, loving families, even as the world keeps changing.
And it's up to each of us to figure out what those principles mean in our own lives.
Exactly. It's an ongoing conversation, always evolving. What works for one family might not work for another, and what works today might need to change tomorrow. The key is to be open to change, talk honestly with our loved ones, and focus on those values that truly matter no matter what our families look like.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us today on this deep dive into traditional family values.
My pleasure.